friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to have a serious discussion, and I look forward to hearing all of your thoughts down in the comments below. But this is a topic that I have been kind of letting percolate in the back of my mind, and it definitely falls adjacent to videos that I have made in the past about sexual violence in fantasy and just dark content in fantasy in general. And this kind of came up again with a recent read that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back in a long string of reads that kept bringing this issue up over and over and over for me. And I just wanted to get it off my chest. I just wanted to sit down and have a conversation about what I've been noticing, some of the patterns that I've been seeing in the reviewer spaces and within fantasy as a genre. And while I don't think that this is limited to fantasy as a genre by any means, fantasy is obviously the genre that I read the most, so it is the one that I'm going to be drawing on for examples and just talking about in general. I do want to just briefly mention that I will be talking about some heavier topics in this video, lightly in general terms, but if that is something that is going to be difficult for you to listen to, I would just ask that you proceed with caution. So what was the catalyst for me sitting down and talking about this topic again? Well, recently I read a book called The Poet Empress by Shen Tao. And I want to make it very clear from the beginning of this video that I am not intending to call out this book specifically, because I think that what I found in this book is, like I said, sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. This is not standing on its own by any means. It is simply the last book out of many that I have read in the last year or two that really made me frustrated with how darker content was handled in it. And beyond that, even more so, some of the responses that I have seen and patterns that I have seen when this book is being talked about online. Now, on the surface, this book is a dark Asian-inspired fantasy about a young woman who becomes the concubine of a crown prince who is known throughout the kingdom as being this terrifying monster of a human being who will take advantage of and harm anyone in his way at any time unpredictably. And all of these young women are brought to the palace. It reads very much like a ancient historical drama. And these young women are brought to the palace, and through a series of events that I won't get too far into, this only has mild spoilers for the very beginning of the book. So if you don't want to hear about that, just skip ahead a little bit. But our main character, not surprisingly, gets very close to this crown prince through the sequence of events that happens after she arrives at the palace. And what follows is some really graphic on-page torture, abuse, sexual self-harm, and a myriad of other things. Now, I want to remind everybody, in the context of what I'm going to be talking about, that not only is this all happening to our main character, she's also technically a minor. Now, I recognize that ancient dramas, ancient history, ages were just seen in a whole different light in a lot of situations like this one, so I understand that. Now, I'm a big believer in the fact that we need to be aware of and take at face value the time period in which certain books were written. However, we are reading this in the 21st century, and we are reading about a young woman who is in her teen years, and again, all of this on-page graphic content is happening to her that we are invited to have a front row viewing seat to see. Now, like I said, The Poet Empress was just one of many books that I have read in the last few years here on BookTube that continue to bring up this problem of graphic, on-page sexual violence against children, against women, against very vulnerable characters. And I have noticed a pattern with a lot of these books that they get kind of lauded as being really deep, really raw, and really honest, and really impactful. And it often draws attention to the aspect of these books that is the graphic content. And I'm starting to get frustrated by that because other books that handle similar topics, not directly on page, I don't know that I see the same intensity in a lot of the reviews that they get. It begs the question, can a book be considered as deep and emotionally honest or as viscerally honest if the abuse, torture, violence does not happen directly on page? Now, of course, in my opinion, the answer to that is a resounding yes. And even when it is on page, I do think that the way it is handled matters a lot. I think there are lots of ways to handle these kind of heavier topics very responsibly. I'm not advocating for the fact that they should be removed from literature or that we should never see on-page violence. I read books that have these kinds of topics in them all the time. And I, again, don't think that that's relegated simply to fantasy by any means. So what's the difference? Because somebody asked me recently, and it was a completely fair question that made me sit back and do a lot of thinking. But Tori, you love books like Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier and Dead House Gates by Stephen Erickson and The Island of Sea Women by Lisa See. And all of these books deal with on-page sexual violence and dark, heavy topics. So what is the difference between those books and something like The Poet Empress and countless others that I've read that have really bothered me and made me angry at the way that these heavier topics are portrayed? The best visual aid I have for this is something that I would call the stage of the story. It is what element of the story is getting the largest and brightest spotlight. Now, in all of the books that I mentioned previously that are big favorites of mine, the moments of sexual violence specifically, since that's the topic we're talking about first, are on stage. They're with the characters. The characters have to carry these things, and yet the brightest spotlight is still on the character themselves. It's on the world around them. It's on the conflicts. It's on the story. It's on there's a balance between all of these elements, and the violence itself, the sexual abuse, whatever it might be, does not feel like it is front and center the entire time of the story. To me, when an author brings those moments front and center and gives them depth while staying on kind of a surface level with a lot of the other aspects of the story, it really drives home the idea that what is happening in this moment, this horrible, traumatic experience, is the most important driving aspect of the story. And in my opinion, that gets into some really gray territory with responsibly handling these kind of heavy topics. For example, in Dead House Gates by Stephen Erickson, which is one of my favorite fantasy novels of all time, there is every possible kind of content warning in that book. It is a very heavy book. There is a lot of things, horrible things, that happen to the characters, and one character in particular as we move through the story. The arc that character goes on is very difficult to read, and yet the trauma, which is oftentimes happening on page, is spotlighted, in my opinion, behind the character themselves. The character is the arc, not the trauma. The same thing with The Island of Sea Women by Lisa See. Lisa See does not pull punches with this content. She shows the lives of these characters in very honest detail, and sometimes that is gut-wrenching and hard to read, and horrible things happen to these characters. But again, the trauma is an aspect of the story. It is spotlighted to the side of the front and center characters. When it comes to The Poet Empress, what frustrated me about this so much, not only because it was happening on page to a minor character, that trauma became the front and center spotlight of the entire story. The world building around it, the political tensions around it, the relationships around it did not carry the same weight in terms of how the world building was designed in this story. And the trauma became the driving force behind everything that happened, with all of the other elements sort of acting as side characters. Now, whether you agree with me on specific aspects of a specific book or not, I think the deeper question that I'm asking us as a book community is, do we too often equate graphic on-page sexual abuse, sexual violence, taking advantage of vulnerable characters, do we equate that with depth? Do we give that extra weight when we're thinking about how impactful a read might be? And do we think about how do the scales tip when it comes to the elements of the story? Is the trauma the point? Is the trauma driving the entire story, with the character as merely a carrier, if you will? And honestly, I think an even bigger question we need to constantly be asking ourselves as we read these kind of scenes, both as readers and writing them as authors, is, why am I including this scene? Why was this scene shown on page? Does the language being used highlight the character, or does it highlight the trauma? Now, something I want to bring up, because it's probably the most common response that I get when talking about sexual violence in literature, is the, well, it's realistic comment, which, I'm going to be honest, is one of my least favorite comebacks ever about this sort of content. I think it's really funny that people assume I wouldn't know that, or also that they feel the need to remind me that sexual violence against helpless women and children most often is realistic. Like somehow that negates the fact that it should be wildly disconcerting and disturbing to read, to view, even in the theater of the mind. I don't really understand that comment, if I'm being honest. I don't understand why it is used as a way to kind of nullify bringing up issues with this particular topic. Now, I will be the first to admit that I do not have all the answers when it comes to how to handle sexual violence, sexual abuse, etc. in literature. I have a lot of strong opinions on what I have seen that handles it poorly. And also, I'm of the opinion that 80 to 90% of the on-page scenes that I have read during my time as a reader didn't need to be on page. I think that the same emotional impact, the same event can be utilized in the story without being on page. And I think when it's on page, the language used around these kind of scenes often drifts into a territory that almost starts to feel either like wish fulfillment or shock value, or like the trauma is the point, none of which are, in my opinion, healthy ways to approach scenes like this. Now, if I've somehow given the impression that I'm saying trauma isn't a big deal, please understand I'm saying the complete opposite. I'm saying that trauma is such a big deal that we need to be careful how we handle it. We need to be aware when we're reading it, how it is being handled and how it's being portrayed to us. And trauma certainly isn't the only heavy topic that I think needs to have responsible handling when we're reading and writing it. But it is one that keeps coming up for me because it is one that I am particularly sensitive to in literature, and something that I view with a very sharp eye when I'm reading it, and also something that I think very, very seriously about if I am portraying any kind of trauma with my characters in my own work. Now, I realize that this has been a ramble, and I think I just wanted to talk about it because it's been really weighing heavily on my mind as I've been reading the past couple of years and coming across more and more on-page sexual violence in books, and oftentimes leaving me feeling really angry at the way it was handled. Now, to respond to one of my former critics from the first video I did on this topic a couple of years ago, am I more sensitive to these kind of scenes because I am myself a survivor of sexual violence? Yes. And I don't know in what universe I would pretend otherwise, or why I would be ashamed of that, because I'm not. All of us bring our own individual experiences to the books that we read, to the books that we write, and I think that that's incredibly important. And I think that because I'm very aware of it, and because I think very deeply about these kind of scenes when I stumble across them in a story, I think it's important for me to be aware of them, and it's important for me to bring my experience to the table and look at these scenes in a way that asks these questions, because that's what storytelling does. It allows us to express ourselves. It allows us to, find catharsis, find inspiration, find healing in a lot of different ways. And those are just some of the reasons why stories are so incredibly meaningful and why they are so incredibly important to us as human beings. It allows us to connect with experiences not our own. It allows us to connect with experiences that we've had. It allows us to look in a mirror or give us something to aspire to. And again, I think all of those are beautiful aspects of storytelling. And I do think that it is incredibly important to ask ourselves questions about the dark content we read, and ask ourselves, is it impactful because the event itself happened on page and we got to view the whole thing? Or is it impactful because of the way the character overcame, because of the way the character themselves responded, or the arc that the character went through, which just had this trauma as a part of a whole picture? And to make sure that our characters aren't being reduced to their trauma. And again, I just want to reiterate that Poet Empress is one book. I think there's a lot of really great aspects to it. I don't want to pick on it specifically, because I do not think that this is an issue that is relegated just to that book. Poet Empress is just one book of many that I've read in the last couple of years that had, in my opinion, unnecessary on-page graphic sexual violence scenes. And so I wanted to sit down and talk about it as a general topic. So, again, I would love to know you guys' thoughts down in the comments. I appreciate you sitting with me as I muddle through my thoughts on this, and I look forward to chatting with you. I do hope that you are having a great week. I hope that you are reading some amazing reads that really are meaningful to you. And I will see you in the next video.